تحياتي للجميع. مرة تانية شكرا على الحضور. النهاردة معايا ضيف مختلف. أنا دي هتبقى آخر مرة أتكلم فيها بالإنجليزي في الانترفيو ده، عشان الضيف طبعا ما بيتكلمش معانا إنجليزي، هنتكلم إنجليزي، وبعد كده لو في أي حاجة تحتاج ترجمة هترجمها. So hello Alex Connor, the Alex Connor. Maybe not many of us, even atheists or deists here in the Middle East, might be following you because probably the language barrier or so. So I'd like to thank you very much for accepting the invitation. Great to have you here.
Well, thank you for having me on. I'm glad to be able to speak to an audience that perhaps wouldn't be already familiar with some of the things I've said. It's a good opportunity.
Thanks a lot, Alex. If we can start with a quick introduction about yourself, what you do.
Of course. So like you say, my name is Alex. I on YouTube, I have the pseudonym CosmicSkeptic, making videos generally, trying to debunk what I see as pseudo-philosophical claims, no matter what they concern. However, most of the time when I come across them, they seem to concern the philosophy of religion. So it's come to be known as a channel that is atheistic in nature, which I don't mind at all. But generally speaking, the end goal isn't so much that as it is just generally trying to engage with philosophical ideas. So I've been spending a lot of time recently doing some videos about morality, which I'm hoping to expound upon because I've been doing a lot of private thinking and changing my mind on a lot of things. So that should be coming up. But yeah, so that's the main thing that I do, and that's why people subscribe to the channel and watch the content I produce. But simultaneously, I also have a blog where I sometimes write articles. I sometimes write periodically for other publications as well. I'll have an article in the next edition of Secular World that's coming out, which is, I believe, going to be available online as well as in print. I'm currently a student at the University of Oxford studying philosophy and theology, which is one of the reasons I haven't uploaded very much. But while I'm here, I'm also engaging in certain writings, trying to write polemically in favor of free speech and against people who seem to be in favor of no platforming certain speakers at, for instance, the Oxford Union. It's something that's happening all the time here. And I'm engaged in a society that is dedicated to protecting free speech. So as a general overview, that is what I'm currently engaged with and why people seem to be following some of the works that I put out.
All right, perfect. So I have your link to your channel and your blogs down below in the description. Please visit the YouTube channel and the blogs. I myself found it very useful and informative, and you will learn a lot. I can confirm this. Since I didn't know you were at Oxford, the Oxford, and studying philosophy, and probably this would explain the complexity of your discussion, specifically when you were discussing the morality, meta-ethics with someone I don't recall the name. Sorry about this. So that was very intense and complicated, sophisticated for me. This kind of this will change the direction of this interview a little bit, since you've pulled up this the concept of like debunking all of the things that you might perceive as, I don't know, mythology, myths maybe. So why do you want to do this? What's wrong with religions? What's wrong, even if I believe like in a mysterious god or like a metaphysical monster in the sky? What's wrong with this? Why don't you go and chase people who believe in Santa Claus?
Well, one of the things is I noticed this question is asked a lot, and I think there's something of an inconsistency when it is asked, which is that I don't think that the criticism or analysis of religious claims require any more of a warrant than the criticism or analysis of, say, art, music, or literature. So if you find an art critic who writes articles for a newspaper talking about the latest theatrical productions or albums have been released, it would seem, why are you attacking these artists? Why are you trying to analyze what they're doing? Well, the reason is because a lot of people engage with these things. A lot of people engage with this entertainment, and it's their job as a journalist to say, here's what I think you should be listening to. Here's the music I think you'll enjoy, and here's what you're wasting your time with. Now, myself, because I study philosophy, it's my main concern, and because I just have an innate love for truth that I think that most rational creatures do as well. I see my job in a similar light, which is to say, I am engaged in trying to spread what I believe to be true, and I'm trying to uncover as many philosophical and scientific truths as possible, or at least understand as many as I can. And so, similarly to how a journalist in the music industry might recommend certain albums, I'm recommending certain philosophical positions and offering a defense of why people should follow them. So, the reason I'm doing it is because philosophy is at the basis of everything we do. It's at the basis of all action. And so if I'm able to discover what I believe to be a good idea that I think can help people determine how they should be living their lives, then the best thing that I think I can do with that information is try to explain it as succinctly as I can. And oftentimes that takes the form of arguing against people who believe the opposite. But whatever form it takes, if I'm able to take an idea that has helped me determine a better way for living, and share that in a way that's accessible or in a way that will get seen by people who otherwise wouldn't have engaged with the idea, then I consider my job to be done. So that's the reason I do it. But on a more simple level, it's just because it's what I enjoy. It's I enjoy taking part in the debates. I enjoy taking part in the discussions, and to do it publicly just leaves a lot more room for engagement from third parties, adding new information and new ideas to the discussion.
Okay, so let's start from the beginning. So do you want to tell us about your belief system or disbelief system, maybe?
So, I was raised as a Roman Catholic, and I didn't think much of it when I was younger. And it's only now that I'm really beginning to see the horror of that organization. But as far as I stand at the moment, I'm glad you kind of rectified what you were saying there, because I don't exactly have a belief system concerning religion. It's often characterized as agnosticism, which isn't an unfair thing to say. However, it's often painted as though agnosticism is incoherent with atheism, and I see it as not. My agnosticism is about my knowledge claim. I don't claim to know either way on this discussion, but I will say that as far as my beliefs are concerned, I see no reason to throw my weight behind the idea that there is the existence of some kind of God or the existence of a creed of religion. So part of what I'm doing on YouTube and elsewhere is effectively stating, I have no reason to believe this claim. Here's your opportunity to change my mind. Here's why I don't think that the arguments that have been put forth so forward are very convincing. And if you want to point me in the direction of arguments that you think might convince me, then be my guest. But my position, so to speak, as of now, is just one of sitting on the fence and waiting for someone to come and push me either way.
Okay, so this might bring us back to the first question. If I understand correctly, you're saying that you're agnostic, so you don't have anything to make you believe that there is first cause or a God or whatever, and you don't have anything that makes you believe otherwise. So
Well,
again,
it's not so much a 50-50. The agnosticism that is within most people who call themselves atheists is not to say that they are equally convinced either way. For instance, if I had to place a bet, then I'm more inclined to think that let's say atheism is more reasonable than theism is, for instance. But I won't claim certainty with that. That's the difference, I think, as well, between the agnostic atheist and the theist, who is also technically agnostic since they have no way of knowing, even if they claim to know. The difference is that whilst the theist pretty much, according to most religious doctrines anyway, has to claim certainty, because if they show doubt and if they show skepticism, then that is indicative of a lack of faith and therefore a lack of trust in the God, and that reflects badly upon them. Um, so whereas they have to approach the situation with a level of certainty, that is absent from the agnosticism on the side of atheism, which can sit wherever you want. You don't have to say that you're certain of the claim, although you can if you like. You can say that you believe utterly that there is no God, but you could also say that you're completely on the fence, and anything in between counts too. And I'd say that I sit somewhere in the middle of that side of the agnostic spectrum.
so I would say that you're currently in the position of I don't know, I'm not sure, but if I have to choose, then I would go for the no section, right?
I suppose so. I'd see it as like if you asked me, if you introduced me to a man who I'd never met before and asked me to guess his age, and I said something like, you know, my instinct tells me that he's in his 30s. I'm not certain of that. I'm pretty sure I would definitely not believe that he's 10 years old. And in that sense, I definitely don't believe in Roman Catholicism or the doctrines of Islam, for instance. But I won't claim to know that he is in his 30s in the same way that I won't claim to know anything about the existence of God. But some claims are more reasonable than others. If your claim is simply that there is a God, a first mover, for instance, that would be analogous to you saying, actually, I think this man is 28. And I could say, look, you know, I see why you might say that. He looks a bit older to me, but I see where you're coming from. But to me, when you have a Roman Catholic, when you have a Muslim, or when you have someone who claims absolute knowledge of the word of God, then they're as good as telling me that that person is a teenager, which I can just immediately denounce and call nonsense on. So it depends on the specific claim that's being put forward. If you're talking about theism in general, if you're talking about a particular type of theism, if you're just talking about deism, that will determine how much I'm convinced either way. But generally speaking, it is simply in line with how much the claim lines up with either philosophical reasoning or scientific evidence. The more of that there is to bolster a claim, the more likely I am to be tipping in the side of favor of it. Faith won't do it for me.
Perfect. So the reason why I'm asking this is normally what we like non-theists in general provide is just a bunch of whole out of knows things. So people sometimes when they come and say there is God, this God is the Islam God, this is Yahweh, this is the Christ, whatever, and then when I say no, guys, this is wrong. Your God cannot be the same God who wrote the Quran, who wrote the Bible. These gods are like they don't know anything about physics. They don't know anything about biology. They don't know anything about anything. So if there's a God to this universe, it can never be him. So they start asking questions. Then who? Then can you explain this? Can you explain that? Can you explain the origin of this, the origin of that? Then the answer would be, I don't know. I just don't know. So if you don't know, what are you providing? What are you debating about? You don't know. You're just saying that you don't know. What are you promoting here?
I'm more promoting the idea that you don't know either. It's not me who's making the claim after all. It's the person who comes and stands on the street and tells me that I'm going to hell if I don't accept his message. And all I'm doing is saying, I'm sorry, I'm not having that. You've got to give me more than some just ridiculous philosophical line of reasoning or some outdated scriptural nonsense. It's not so much that I'm representing a position. I never claimed to be providing something. I'm not providing a philosophical way to live in specific reference to the God argument. I mean, I'm not offering an alternative so much. I'm not offering like you say, if someone says, if not this God, then what? Well, I could say, I don't know, but neither do you. And that's the important point. Like, if you want to work together with me to try and work out what the answer is, then I'm happy to do that. But in order to take that step, we first have to get rid of all the bad ideas that are currently in circulation. And one of those is the certainty of the idea that there's a specific God at the beginning of the universe and currently penetrating it in every way.
Okay, so this again would bring us to the original topic, which is God. So you study philosophy, so you know more than anyone else in this session what the arguments are. So like tens of arguments or so. So cumulatively, those arguments, they do not construct any belief, anything that would make you think that this is plausible, that there is a first mover, there is a God, a creator, a first cause.
Well, perhaps you could give me one.
No, not one. I mean, it's like it's a cumulative thing. So I'm not just saying that there is the cosmological argument, there is the fine tuning argument, the whatever the rest of the arguments, ontological argument, and so on. It's not just one argument. We have multiple arguments. So if each and every one would contribute to let's say 5% of the whole structure of this belief system, let's say we have like now 50% now.
These arguments, the type of arguments that would work cumulatively rather than as a surefire way to prove something, are by nature inductive. That is to say that they are not the conclusion doesn't logically follow from the premises. So the arguments that you're talking about, for instance, the fine-tuning argument, is an inductive argument. It simply says, look around, look at the complexity, look at the way that the universe seems to be finely tuned for life. Now, I would say that this argument is a bad one anyway, but even if it were a good one, it's not deductive. It doesn't prove the case. So you take that argument and you take another argument like it, and you take another argument like it, and as you're saying, that could cumulatively provide you with a reason to believe that God exists. But where I say that you cannot prove that God does not exist, you can also come up with inductive arguments in favor of that claim. You could point to the evil in the world and the problem of evil. You could point to the poor design, or at least the design flaws in the universe and the world, if humans are supposed to be the center of the creation. You can point to flaws in the moral doctrines of the Bible or the Quran, which seem to contradict our moral intuitions. You can point to the problematic nature of human sacrifice in the figure of Christ, or the idea of inheritable sin in original sin. These don't disprove the Bible. These don't disprove the existence of God, but they provide a little bit of an argument, and then you've got another one, and then you've got another one, and you put them together and you have a convincing case. But what we've got now is some good inductive arguments for the existence of God and some good inductive arguments against the existence of God. And neither are sufficient to prove the case. And so at the moment, they sit fairly equally to me. So yes, there may be a good cumulative case for the one, but there's also a good cumulative case for the other. And I'm not ready to accept that one is more reasonable than the other until someone provides me with something more to really push it above the other. And if they are equal, then we have to remember where the burden of proof is. And the burden of proof lies with the person who's making the claim in favor of the existence of God. So if the arguments are equal, then we have to reject the claim. As it were, we have to assume innocence before something, and something has to be proven to be guilty. We have to assume the non-truth of the claim until the truth of the claim is proved. So as long as these remain equal, we have to really, if we're going to be rational people, assume the negation of the claim.
Perfect. So we just have our colleague Adam. He's a fellow deist from a Christian background, from an Islamic background. So now you're covered. So hello, Adam. Adam's in Australia, so it's pretty early over there, right?
Hello, guys. How are you? Yeah, well, it's 3 a.m. in the morning.
Nice. I mean, we're having Alex Corner. I know you know
Hi,
him.
Alex.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet
So
you too.
Alex, just picking up where we left off on the at the inductive arguments. Now, so are we not believing in inductive arguments anymore?
That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that if you're going to say that there's a cumulative case with inductive arguments in favor of a claim, there's also some inductive arguments against it. That's all I'm saying. You know, these arguments are convincing. You know, they make a strong case, but they're just not enough for me, because they are cancelled out by arguments on the other side. And there's not one that particularly cuts above the crowd and is able to not be matched on the other side. Every argument that I've ever come across in favor of God either claims to be deductive and is not, or is inductive and has a similarly convincing inductive claim to the contrary.
Okay, so I can make a claim, and you might correct me if I'm wrong. I don't believe that there is really concrete deductive arguments in this world that we live in, unless if there is kind of a concrete definition of something, like a bachelor guy who is not married. So this is something. It's a definition that we have come up with, and it's us that we make up the deductive arguments. Otherwise, it's inductive arguments. The whole scientific method is built on top of inductive arguments. Am I right?
Well, I think you might be getting at another distinction there. There are two distinctions that it's important to make here. The first is the distinction between a deductive argument and an inductive argument. The second is between analytical thinking and empirical thinking. So what you're talking about in terms of bachelors being necessarily unmarried is the statement that a bachelor is unmarried is true by nature of the meaning of the words. You don't have to observe anything. You don't have to do anything to know that that is true. That means that it is what's called an analytic statement. Whereas something like, the claim that the grass outside the window is green, that's a synthetic claim because it requires empirical observation. So that's one distinction. The distinction between inductive and deductive arguments. An inductive argument is one in which the conclusion does not logically follow from the premises, whereas a deductive argument is one in which it does. So you don't necessarily have to have, you can have a deductive argument that refers to synthetic propositions. So for instance, if I say all grass is green, there is some grass outside, the conclusion is the grass outside is green. That is a deductive argument, but it's not analytical. It's not analytically true because the premises rely on empiricism. So it's still a deductive argument, but it's not analytical. So in the same way with science, science does work by nature of induction, of course, but it can also make deductive arguments based on certain axioms that it has. So if we grant, for instance, certain scientific observations, if we grant the observation that things fall when we drop them, if we grant the idea that our senses are telling us the truth, for instance, which not all people do, but most people do, then we can come up with deductive arguments that allow us to prove certain scientific facts. That is essentially what mathematics does. And mathematics is at the basis of physics. It is just what is equal to what. That is the essence of mathematics. It's about creating tautologies. It's about saying, how can we find something that logically follows from premises? The premises don't have to be analytical. The premises can be empirical. The premises can be whatever you want them to be. You can still have conclusions that deductively follow. So yes, it's true. The only thing that can really be shown to be true as a matter of absolute undeniable fact are analytic truths. But if you grant certain synthetic truths, which most people do, for instance, the idea that the external reality exists, I mean, that is not an analytical truth. That is synthetic truth. But it's very rare that you'll come across a person who acts as though external reality does not exist. Science can work on synthetic propositions like that to draw deductive conclusions, even though there's no way of knowing absolute certainty about these things.
So yeah, synthetic truth. You mean like kind of like brute fact? The universe is there.
Well, I mean that's what most people will do, because there is a philosophical school of skepticism which says that there is no way to know anything except for the fact that you exist, which is a fair point. I mean, technically speaking, we have no way to know that. There are certain assumptions that you have to make when you're doing rational thinking, and that's really the biggest problem of philosophy. No one can quite ground that. But the problem of grounding rationality and the problem of grounding reason is no more a problem for the atheist than it is for the theist. I was in a debate with Frank Turek once, and he asked me how I could justify reason. And I talked to him about this, and he said, well, listen, evolution gave you your reasoning faculties, and then you're using your reasoning faculties to justify evolution, for instance. That's circular. And I said, that's true, but then you are claiming that God exists using reason, and you believe that you got your reason from God. That's also circular. So it doesn't actually matter who it is that comes across the problem of skepticism. It affects everybody. So yes, you can point to science and say that, well, actually, technically, science is working on induction all the time. If that's the case, then so is religious philosophy, and there's no such thing as a deductive argument in favor of the existence of God, because even if the premises follow from the conclusion, the conclusion follows from the premise, then the premises might just be unprovable because we have no way to know if external reality even exists. So it's no more a problem for someone who thinks that the universe exists and has no cause, or for someone who thinks that the universe does exist and does have a cause. It's the same problem for everybody.
Perfect. So let's solve this this conflict then. Let's just rule out all the religions, and we end up with only inductive arguments for God.
Mm-hmm.
So let's. Can you hear me well? Yeah, right. So as you just mentioned, so against all of the bunch of inductive arguments for God, there is an opposite side of inductive arguments against God from the Scripture. So what happens if I just eliminate all of the Scripture, eliminate all of the religions?
What do you mean from Scripture?
I mean, remove religions altogether. Even actually, all of the arguments for God, they're not arguments for the religious God. They are arguments for a first creator, for a designer, for whatever the first cause, and so on, right?
Okay, so those arguments themselves, even the ones as simple as saying that there is a cause for the beginning of the universe, have arguments that claim to the contrary, and they're just as convincing.
Arguments against the first cause.
Yes, or at least arguments against the arguments being put forward in favor of that position. I mean, the idea that there is a first cause to the universe is a very intuitive one, but intuition is no indication of truth. We are able to we have an instinctive belief that anything that begins to exist must have some kind of cause. But what's that based upon? How do we possibly know that that's the case? We haven't even seen anything ever begin to exist in a meaningful sense, that is to say, out of nothing. We've never observed anything beginning to exist out of nothing. So we can't say, as the Kalam cosmological argument does, that everything that begins to exist has a cause, because we've never seen anything begin to exist out of nothing. The only thing that's ever begun to exist out of nothing, if anything has at all, is the universe itself. So you can't say that everything that begins to exist has a cause, and therefore the universe has a cause, because you don't know that everything that begins to exist has a cause. And even if you did, the only thing that's actually begun to exist is the universe itself. So the first premise just becomes the universe has a cause. And the conclusion is the universe has a cause. You've not said anything. It's a circular argument. So that makes the argument that makes the argument flawed. And that's not necessarily an argument to say that the universe does not have a cause, but it's an argument to say that the seemingly intuitive idea that it does is not grounded in rationality. And you'll need to come up with something else in order to make you believe that there is a cause at the beginning of this whole thing.
Oh, okay. So, Adam, do you have anything to say before I move on to the next point? And Alex, if you could just adjust the mic, there's a hissing in your mic.
Oh, a hissing. Maybe that might be the fans of my computer or something.
Okay.
How does it sound now? I just turned it up a little bit. I don't know if that will help.
It's a little better, but it was better before. What was when we started off?
Okay. I think it's just the fan on my computer has kicked in because of the heat. So that's probably what's.
It's good now.
Sound. Okay. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah. Hello, Adam.
No, I think it's good from my end. I was going to just because I joined late, I was trying to make sure that I'm actually following what you guys are saying. So you can move on to the next question. I might just step in at some point because I want to grab Alex's brain on something, but no, just move on for now.
Right, thanks, Adam. So one of the things that I had intention to do an episode on pretty soon is the arguments from faith, personal experience, miracles, maybe, because this is something that I normally get from people, especially people where I come from. They're not really that educated on the Kalam cosmological argument, fine tuning, and everything. So they ask the regular naive questions about where do you come from? How do you disbelieve in God? Where do you come from? Where does this come from? Where everything comes from? So they ask those regular questions. But normally I also get people that saying that well, I can feel God. God is everywhere. He has been there for me in many cases. I have seen him. I have seen him in my dreams. I have seen the picture talking to me. I had miracles in my life. He changed my life. So how do we respond to such conversations?
Well, I don't doubt that these people really have seen these things and really have experienced these things. But we have to remember how susceptible the human mind is to illusions. And we also have to bear in mind that for every claim coming out of Somalia that someone has had a vision of Allah telling them that they need to cut off their daughter's clitoris, for every claim of that, there's also a claim in the United States of someone who's seen a vision of Jesus Christ telling them that they need to vote in favor of retaining the Second Amendment. Like, it doesn't matter where you go, there are visions of God that always and just by chance happen to line up with the person's cultural environment. Now, if somebody in the United States who was living in southern Texas, surrounded by a 90% Christian community, had a vision of the Buddha telling him that he needs to reach enlightenment and move to the east and sit under a tree and meditate until he finds happiness, that would be a little more extraordinary. And those kinds of things do happen. But especially now with the world being so informationally connected, excuse me, there is much more room for people to hear of certain ideas from all around the world and have visions of these things. So it's not indicative of the truth of something just because someone's experienced a vision. You would have to explain why somebody else is able to experience a vision or experience even a miracle that directly contradicts the very thing that you're claiming to have had a vision of. And you need to think about it rationally, because when you have a dream, the dream feels real. It's only when you wake up that you realize that the dream was false, and you realize it with no problem whatsoever. Now, I used to be a Roman Catholic. I used to have the same kind of visions and the same kind of experience as these people are claiming to have. But similarly to how when you're dreaming, you think and you can't imagine that the dream just isn't real. You wake up and instantly you recognize that the whole thing was a folly. In the same way, after I dropped the Roman Catholic faith, it was like waking up and realizing instantly that everything that I'd experienced up to there, involving gods and involving any kind of miraculous interventions, was equally equally folly. It's easy to do, but only if you take a step back. So I don't doubt that these people really have these experiences, but we need to judge whether the experiences are valid. And if they are valid, you have to prove why yours is more valid than your next door neighbors who had a vision that contradicts yours.
Regarding miracles, though, so why don't you believe in miracles? If people 1400 years ago, they believed in it. A lot of people saw these miracles, and they believed someone had a revelation, someone had an archangel of God talking to him, and then he expected something to happen a couple of years after that, and that happened, and everyone can testify this. So why don't you believe this?
Well, here's the thing. With so many people on the planet, and I'm not just talking about the people on the planet now, I'm talking about the history of humanity, something around 100 billion people have ever lived. The chances that one of those people, or a significant percentage of those people actually, or not a significant percentage, but a significant number of those people, the chances that some of those people didn't predict something that then went on to occur are practically zero. It would be a statistical improbability that, given the amount of people that exist and the amount of things that they think, that every so often one of them makes a prediction that comes true. Now, is that miraculous, or is that just a matter of chance and statistics? That's I leave that to the judice of the listener. But there are more than one type of miracle, and there are more than one type of definition for miracle. I mean, what are we calling a miracle here? Are we talking in the Humean sense, like David Hume defined a miracle as a transgression of the law of nature? We could be talking about miracles in the sense that Thomas Aquinas defined them in the Christian sense, which is to say miracles can be things that could happen in nature but don't happen through the normal ways that nature works. Maybe a plant grows without being watered or something. You could be talking about miracles. Richard Swinburne, a professor at this university, has defined a type of miracle in which, like what you're alluding to there, where a coincidental event happens and it's interpreted in a religious format, in a religious context. Like he gives the example of a child is playing on a train track and gets stuck, and a train comes along the track, and just by chance the brakes fail on the train, so the emergency brakes just immediately kick in and the train stops just before hitting the child. Now, it'd be very difficult for a mother witnessing her child nearly get hit by a train, who just by chance the train stops right in front of them, not to say that's miraculous. But it doesn't contradict the laws of physics. It doesn't contradict the laws of probability, because, like I say, there are so many events similar to this that the chances of one of them happening like this is an inevitability. But people would still call that a miracle. So you can tackle these one by one. Firstly, if a miracle is a transgression of a law of nature, then when we experience something that goes against the law of nature, we've got two choices. Either we've gotten something wrong and the law of physics needs to be amended. For instance, the law of planetary orbit. Somebody might have noticed a planetary aberration where the planet kind of goes back on itself and then carries on going. It's one of the most important discoveries in astronomy in terms of discovering the existence of planets is concerned. In fact, I believe the word planet itself comes from a translation of the term wandering star, because the stars all seem to move, but there were some that seemed to wander around, and those were planets. Now, two choices. We'll either say every celestial body moves in a straight line and that was a miracle, or we say, actually, our law is wrong and not everything moves in that way. And we decided to say, actually, we need to amend our law of physics, and we got the answer right. So if we see something that seems to contradict the laws of nature, then the only thing that would be reasonable to do is to say that we've got the law wrong. It's not that the law has been transgressed. It's not that there's been some divine intervention. It's that the law is wrong and we can change the law. Now, if a miracle is the coincidental type, like the type that you were talking about, then that's even easier to dismiss, because for every miracle, for every incredibly unlikely situation where a child is saved from death, there is also an incredibly unlikely situation and statistical improbability where a child happens to be walking along a beach just as the rock falls off the cliff and cuts their head open and they're dead. I mean, would we call that a miracle? I mean, what are the chances that that child would just happen to be stood in the exact place on the beach where the rock would hit their head and kill them? But you wouldn't dream of calling that a miracle, even though it's a statistical improbability. You would just say bad luck. And yet when the exact same thing happens, but in the reverse, and the child is saved from a near death, we call it a miracle. Why do we do that? Well, I don't. I suppose I would ask the person who claims that, why are you doing that? And would you, if you're going to claim that God governs in the affairs of man and governs everything that happens, and any time that something good happens to a person, it's due to his bidding, then you have to also accept that he's in charge of the bad things too. People tell me it's impossible to stand in front of the Grand Canyon and deny that God exists. And it's just as easy to say that it's impossible to walk through the ward of a children's cancer ward and deny that he does not. Miracles don't do it for me.
So you're not assuming that in terms of expectations, people expecting something to happen in the future, you're not assuming that maybe only what really happened made it through history and got documented, and whatever that he expected and did not happen, that was not written down.
Well, I mean, that certainly is part of the structure of this argument here. Yes, if you make a prediction and it doesn't come true, it's not notable. So nobody cares. If you were to count up, I mean, you can just intuit this. If I were to count up somehow, if I was some omnipotent being that was able to count up every single time a claim had been made, every single time a prediction had been made about the future, whether that be by an astrologer, whether that be by a friend who thinks that his friend might call him the next day or something like that, every single time it's happened, and that number were to be compared against the number of times that those predictions came true, we don't need to do this to realize that obviously the first list would be unthinkably longer than the second. So every single time that one of these things does come true, there's 100 times that, 1,000 times that for predictions that didn't come true as well. So to me, it's not that extraordinary. The only extraordinary thing would be if no predictions came true.
So the last point here in this section is the personal experience, especially from our Christian friends. They normally say, "Well, I believed in Jesus, and He changed my life. I was so and so and so and so, and now I'm a good guy." How do you explain this?
Well, I mean, good for them. Like I discovered John Stuart Mill, and he made me a better person. I discovered countless philosophers who made me a better person. And it doesn't matter to me whether they lived or not. It doesn't matter to me whether they were the son of God or not. I've discovered Jesus when I was a young child, and he taught me the golden rule, and I'm grateful for it. But that doesn't say anything about the existence of the man. That doesn't say anything about his moral character. And not everything that he said was so great. So to me, it doesn't matter. And besides the point, if you're going to say that, okay, so you could respond to that by saying, yes, okay, there are philosophers that have affected my moral philosophy, but none of them have given me the authority of morality that God does. Well, then I'm afraid you and I are just not alike. I like to think that the reason I do good things or try to do good things is for the sake of doing good things. I don't need the kind of otherworldly and supernatural motivation that religious good intentions seem to require. I mean, the Catholic Church can't lift a finger in the name of charity without telling us why it's doing God's bidding. When I give to charity, I don't care whose bidding I'm doing. In fact, the only person whose bidding I'm doing is my own. I don't need the divine authority or the divine warrant to do good things. So if somebody found Jesus and it made them a better person, good for them. but that doesn't mean that Jesus existed. That doesn't mean he was the Son of God. It doesn't mean that the only place that their morality has come from is Jesus. And it doesn't mean that I give the moral doctrines of Christianity any more weight.
So it's a personal decision. It's probably group effect.
I mean, yes, they can do what they like. It is a personal decision to accept any moral doctrine that you want, and you could be right or wrong in I mean, you can be. There are better and worse moral theories, but to me, the accuracy or truth or compellingness of any moral doctrine doesn't lie in the authority of the person who presents it, but in the effects of the doctrine itself. So whether the doctrine comes from Jesus Christ or Socrates doesn't matter to me. What matters is the actual content. If I produced a moral doctrine that was the antithesis, that was anathema to Christianity, and told you that Christ had said it, would the Christian simply say, well, if Christ said it, then I'll accept it? I mean, if God decided tomorrow that murder was wrong, would you really be able to accept that and act upon it? Murder isn't wrong, excuse me. I think that's what I said. If God said that tomorrow, made a decree and said, actually, you know what? Rape is the right thing to do in every situation. Would you be able to bring yourself to do it? I don't think so. And the same is true in the opposite sense, that if you discovered tomorrow, if you tell the person who found Jesus Christ, if they found out tomorrow that God did not exist, would they go and start raping and pillaging and murdering? Or would they continue to act morally? Now, if they do that, if they say yes, then you can see that it's an illusion, because this argument here is this doctrine has made this person a moral person. Isn't that a good thing? Well, if they would be willing to go and rape and pillage and murder if Jesus did not exist, then they're not actually a moral person. It hasn't made them a moral person. They've just deluded themselves. Whereas if they say that they wouldn't, go and do these things, then we see right through the idea that Jesus was needed in the first place. So either Jesus was needed and this person isn't a moral person, so the argument doesn't do it for me, or Jesus wasn't needed, and so the argument definitely doesn't do it for me.
So let me rephrase this, because this is how I normally go about this. So what makes me a good person when I believe in Jesus? Is it something that is like forcing me, obliging me? Is it something that he like implants inside of me that makes me a good person? So now this hinders my free will, even though my free will to do bad thing. So if you hinder my free will to do the bad thing, then maybe not believing in you, this is something that you already have done to me, forcing me to do the bad thing as well. So how can I be sure about this? And again, if you do this comparison, if I'm a good guy because I believed in you and you implanted this Holy Ghost something inside of me that makes me do good things. However, there is another example of a person that doesn't have this magical pill inside of him, and he doesn't believe in you, and he still does the good thing. So which one is better? The one that was guided and controlled and driven by Jesus, or the good guy that was not driven by anything?
Well, that's a good question. If I hold a gun to your head and tell you to give some money to the poor, and so you tremblingly take out your wallet and drop a few pounds in their hat, and then the person next to me about 5 seconds later, of their own accord, decides to donate the same amount of money, who's done the right thing there? It's unreasonable to suggest that the first person has somehow done a good thing because I've held the gun to their head and told them to do it. Goodness and morality entail personal agency. That's the problem that free will poses to the moral argument. I happen to think you can construct something resembling a theory of ethics in a world without free will. It's fairly complicated matter. I'm still trying to get my head around it, but I'm fairly settled on that at the moment. But if you're claiming, as you say, that a person might say that Jesus made them moral in the sense that he prohibited them from doing bad things, that didn't make them moral. It removed their ability for morality, because morality requires the ability to choose between right and wrong. It requires the ability to do both. If there's only the ability to do one, then there's no such thing as ethics. There's no such thing as morality. If we could invent a pill like the one you're describing, we could invent a pill that was able to remove the ability for people to do things that were considered morally wrong, would you want that pill circulated, or let's say enforced on society, on every single member of society. To me, that sounds like a dystopian nightmare, because you are not promoting morality there, you're promoting enforced behavior. And that is what religion does, because it doesn't tell you, do what is good, because it's good for you and it's good for and it's good of its own, because if you don't, you're going to suffer for it. And to me, that is just as good as holding a gun to their head and forcing them to do it. And to me, that is just as good as having no choice to do the contrary. And if that's the case, morality doesn't exist.
Exactly. Yes. So before moving on, Adam, do you have anything to comment here on this point?
No, I would just argue that this is not really the Christian philosophy, because I remember at some point when I was a child, I was asking the question about why did God created the tree of knowledge in the Garden of Eden, and that was exactly what Alex said. Because without that tree, there is no choice, there is no morality whatsoever. Man will be forced to be good anyway, regardless of his efforts to do that. The fact that we have a choice is what makes a moral act a moral act. Um, so yes, I agree with Alex, but I would suggest that this is also the Christian position on morality.
Yeah. So the tree of knowledge. If I have the choice, if I have freedom, and I have the potential to do the right thing or the wrong thing, how would I be able to utilize this and deploy this without this knowledge that comes out of this tree of knowledge?
I mean, no, it's an accurate point. The Christian doctrine doesn't teach the theory of morality that you were espousing a second ago. The idea that Jesus somehow prohibits your ability to do wrong. That's not at least the Catholic doctrine. I mean, there's so many Christian denominations, you can't fit them in a bag. Like, it's impossible. But most of them would say that that's the opposite. But the most there is an element of grotesqueness within the Christian doctrine of morality as it does exist. So you talk about the fool and you talk about the tree of knowledge, and we say that actually the morality of Christianity isn't so bad because they weren't forced to do good or bad. They were given the choice, and Adam and Eve chose to eat from the tree of knowledge, and so they condemned themselves. Well, what are we left with here? We're left with the concept of inheritable sin. The idea that you are able to be held responsible for crimes that not only did you not commit, but nobody ever committed, because we now know the story of Genesis to be based on nothing else than a mixture of original superstition and plagiarized mythology. But even the metaphorical point, even if there could have been a first man and a first woman and a first sin, the idea that children from the moment of their conception are deserving of an eternal punishment in a series of unimaginable tortures because they've inherited this sinful nature, not just a sinful nature, but a corrupt nature. That's the most grotesque thing I've ever heard. And so for someone who believes that to turn around and tell me how I should be thinking morally, I think is an insult to the intelligence.
How do kids get diabetes from the parents?
They inherit it.
You get this question more than none, definitely.
Well, look, there's no problem. There's no problem with saying that a child can inherit things from their parents, and they can inherit bad behavior. They can inherit a bad moral character in the sense that they can inherit, socially speaking, a predisposition that their environment might set them up to not be the most morally cultivated people, or they might have genetic predispositions to anger or to selfishness, for instance. That's fine. But what you can't say is that before they've even so much as enacted upon any of these, they are responsible for the crime. And also, they're not responsible for that. They're not responsible for the crimes that they're committing. They're responsible for the original sin. And that's the whole reason that they're able to sin in the first place, according to Genesis, or at least that they do sin and are corrupt, is because of this first sin. It's the most grotesque doctrine in all of morality, the idea that you can inherit it. And think about what it means as well. The idea that you can inherit moral character, moral responsibility for crimes of your forefathers that they didn't actually commit. That is identical to the bigotry that's at the basis of another kind of unmentionable and superstitious idiocy, and that's racism. The idea that you can inherit a moral character because of some imagined crime that happened in the past, some imagined moral character that does not actually exist, but we say that it did, and we say that it's inheritable. And so when someone's born, from the moment that they come out of the womb, we can say that you are an inferior person. That's the basis of racism, and that it shouldn't escape you is also the basis of the Christian doctrine of original sin, and it's equally grotesque.
Okay, so let's again. I'll just pick up where you left off here, because there is other doctrines other than the Orthodox and the Catholic ones, and actually the uprising one saying that there is no inherited sin. It's you sin. You don't really have to inherit anything. You do anything, be it small or big. It is a sin. You smoke, that's a sin. You lie, that's a sin. So you hit your roommate, that's a sin. All right, and all of the sins are equal before God. So if you smoke, you deserve hell forever.
Would probably disagree with that, or legal philosophers. It seems to be almost a granted principle now. Now, you could argue that perhaps we need punishments that exceed the crime that's been committed. That I can grant too. But the punishment of hell is eternal. It's infinite. There is no such thing as an infinite crime. It cannot be paid for in that manner. Now, we're not just talking, as you say, about rapists and murderers here, who, as grotesque as their crimes are still not deserving of infinity, still not deserving of an eternity of punishment. There is a point at which the punishment has overtaken the crime that's been committed, and it doesn't matter what the crime is. But we're not just talking about these extreme cases. We're also talking, as you say, about people who smoked a cigarette. It's obscene. It's absolutely obscene to say that anybody for any crime should suffer infinitely. It's even worse to say that such a minor crime should have the same fate befitting of someone who's raped somebody. It is confused. It is abominable. It is unspeakable. It is disgusting. It's revolting, and it's again insulting to the intelligence.
So what they normally say is, it's not like punishment. It's like you have chosen not to live. You have chosen to refuse life in the word of God and Jesus Lord. So you refused him, and he is life. And you refused life, so you have chosen to die forever and to.
It's a consequence. It's a consequence. It's not a punishment. Like when you choose to smoke a cigarette, when you get cancer, that's not because you were smoking, so God decided to give you cancer, but it's a consequence of smoking, and you chose to smoke. You're reliable for your cancer. So what do you say?
So if I hold a gun to your head and tell you to give me your wallet, and you don't, then, well, look, I gave you the choice. You chose to reject me. I'm going to shoot you in the head. It's just a consequence. It's perfectly fine for me to shoot you in the head for not giving me your wallet, because you knew that was what was going to happen if you chose not to. Give me a break. This is nonsense. We can't accept the idea that somebody can say, "Hey, what a great life you're having there. It'd be a real shame if I came and held a shotgun to your head and told you to bow down and kiss my feet, otherwise I'm going to blow your brains out." That's not the most merciful thing I've ever heard.
All right, so again, so let's move on to the what's wrong with section, I'm told. So what's wrong with Jesus? Wasn't he that merciful? What's wrong with his doctrine, with his commandment, with his wisdom? What's wrong with him? Forget about the Old Testament and everything. That's just history. Again, the new evangelists, they claim that this is just history. It's not a commandment. It's not something that you have to abide with for the rest of your life. But abide with the new wisdom of Jesus. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Why aren't you poor in spirit, Alex?
Well, Jesus was espousing their virtue ethics. Aristotle did the same thing. Okay, and you can say you can ignore the Old Testament all you like. Augustine, the most important church father in Christian in Christian formation, said that the Old Testament reveals the New Testament. You can find it within the Old Testament. That's what they believe. But it can be simpler than that. Why did Jesus come in the first place? Athanasius states very clearly in his treatise on this, who again was one of the main influences over the the creed that's spoken at every mass service, the Nicene Creed. The original Nicene Creed in 325 was adapted in the 380s after Athanasius had written this treatise, and that is what became now what the Christians espouse as their doctrine of Christology. What does he say? Well, he says that the reason he came is because humanity was in a state of corruption due to the fall of man. The fall of man didn't happen. It's a myth. And we've already discussed the idea of inheritable sin as being absolute nonsense. So the very fact that Jesus is here at all is already a moral abomination. Like, there can be wisdom in what he said. He did say, love one another as I have loved you. He did say, treat the other people how you would wish to be treated. But so did Confucius. And he said it before Jesus came. So everything that Jesus said was either, or at least everything Jesus stood for, shall we say, was either evil or it was moral, but completely unnecessary because other people had already been saying it. It's something that, yes, it's good to find a person who can take a lot of good and wise moral doctrines and put them into a nice, neat package. But if only we could take that, as Thomas Jefferson did, without all of the superstitious nonsense that comes with it. You don't have to believe that Jesus is the Son of God to believe that you should treat your fellow neighbor with respect. You don't need all of that with it. But to your question as to why I think that, at least why I think that Jesus has some bad qualities, the very nature of his existence is a testament to the fact that humanity is in a state of absolute corruption through no fault of its own, through the fault of its first man, whose sin we've all inherited. That's the reason that Jesus came. And that's the reason that Jesus died. And let's not forget what that was too, a human sacrifice. A human sacrifice. The idea that somebody can die for our sins, and remember, we're not just talking about the worst sins, but also the easiest of sins. You know, somebody had to be sacrificed so that if you have a cigarette, you can apologize for it and maybe still get a shot to get into heaven. It's just, where is the morality in this? I mean, where does it exist? If in the meantime, if in between telling everybody that they're corrupt and they're going to go to hell and the human sacrifice that supposedly saved them, if on the way to Calvary, Jesus happened to mutter, oh yes, and by the way, you should probably be nice to each other. I mean, that hardly makes up for it.
And this is the answer that we normally get. Now, what's wrong with you guys? That's why do you really have to care about this? Now, he sacrificed his only son just for you. Okay, just take out your sin. If I just paid off your debts, why wouldn't you accept it? Be it good, be it bad, be it I don't. You know me, you don't know me. Whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, I paid your debts. So why don't you just accept it? He doesn't ask you for anything. He just asks you to accept him.
Okay, he does ask for a lot. He asks me to lay down my life. He asks me to refrain from certain things. He asks me to restrict my choice of sexual partner by 50%. These are not trivial considerations. But as well as that, your question, what is it you're asking here? You're saying,
if you're saying it's a human sacrifice, so what? Okay, a human sacrifice. Why do you care? It's just for you. This is a sacrifice for the whole human race.
Right. Yeah, I remember now. You're paying a debt that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
What debt are you paying? Like, you can throw money at me all you like and say, listen, I'm paying your debt. And I'm like, what debt are you talking about? And you say, oh, well, see, I borrowed a lot of your money and I invested it and lost it all. So I'm paying you back. Be grateful. No, I didn't ask you to take my money in the first place. The debt that you're repaying is a debt that you've bestowed on me on the first place. So it is your responsibility to pay it off. I shouldn't be grateful if you're going to pay a debt for me if I didn't get myself into that debt. And the only reason that I'm in that debt is because you say that I am. The debt does not exist. I'm not going to be grateful for you paying a debt that doesn't exist. And if the debt does exist, then it's a moral abomination anyway. And so I'm not going to be grateful to have it lifted from me. I'm going to say it's about time you did that.
So how is it a moral abomination? Even though, would you like to burn in hell forever rather than accepting a bubble?
No, but would you like me to shoot you in the head more than you want to give me your wallet? Of course you do. Of course you would rather give me your wallet than be shot in the head. But that doesn't mean that I've given you a fair choice.
Yeah. Okay. Shooting you in the head or stabbing you by a knife. Adam, do you have anything to say here before I move on?
No, move on.
All right. So did you have a chance to read on other religions, probably Islam or?
Well, I mean, I've of course come into contact with these things, especially studying theology. But the reason why, I mean, a lot of people ask me why I don't speak so much on Hinduism or Buddhism or whatever it may be, or paganism even. The reason is simply that it's not my forte. You know, I have certain opinions, but it's like how I have opinions on the economy. I have economic opinions, but I'm not an economist. So I wouldn't make a video explaining why libertarianism is the best way to go, or socialism is misinterpreted by the Labour Party, because it's not my field, even though I still have opinions on these things. So to me, there are problems with the idea of for instance, the Hindu concept of karma seems to be ostensibly a good thing, but is tricky for me to see why that would be positive. But it's not something that I'm going to claim a kind of intellectual authority on or anything like that. But Christianity is a lot closer to home, especially Roman Catholicism, because I know much about it from personal experience, and especially when I'm discussing with people like we were saying earlier, who make arguments from personal experience, I'm able to confide in them and say, well, listen, I've also had those experiences, and here's why I think they're flawed. Islam is a bit closer because there's a lot of parallels between Islam and Christianity, and also we come into contact with Islamic doctrine a lot more than we do with, say, Hindu doctrine here in the UK. And also in the way that religion is studied in academic environments. But as I see it, my knowledge of religion is kind of a series of concentric circles with Christianity in the middle, following out towards the sort of pagan cults at the very edges. So, you know, there are opinions on everything. Everything that I know something about, I'll have at least a mild opinion on, but not to the level that I want to assert anything about it, if you know what I mean.
So let me ask you this. If we assume that there is a first cause or God or whatever, would it be plausible and does it make sense if we should think that he must have communicated with people one way or the other?
I mean, why? Why should we? What's that assumption based upon?
You mean of the communication thing?
Yeah.
So if there is a first cause, and if you by any chance believed that it is plausible that someone created this universe, he doesn't really have to communicate with people.
No, of course not. I mean, that's the deistic position. He doesn't even have to still be around. He could be someone who wound up the clock and then let it start ticking. That to me is a lot more noble a position than the theistic position, at least in terms of philosophical argumentation and consistency. But there's no reason to believe either way. I mean, and also there's the point to make that if this divine first cause had somehow penetrated the world and contacted humanity, you'd think that it would have done so in such a way as to be undeniably the case. That's what the figure of Jesus should have been in the Christian doctrine, this undeniable penetration of God into the material world. Well, if it's so undeniable, then why am I sat here denying it? And you could say, well, that's just because you're refusing to accept it, and you just want to stay in your sin. But I can promise you that's not the case. And I promise you that even if that were the case, God would know that that was going to be the case. And so he's either presented a form of communication that he knew full well wasn't going to convince me, in which case he just doesn't care, or he is being purposefully malicious, in which case I don't care. You know, I'm not going to call that God anybody worth worshipping. But if God had communicated with humankind, we have to ask, who is it that he's communicated with? Because many people claim that they've communicated with God, and the gods that they've communicated with are routinely contradicting each other, and routinely sparking wars between nations. So whose account are we going to trust? And why hasn't he spoken to me?
And this communication would entail responsibility or liability of somehow. Since you have communicated with me, then there is a message that you have conveyed to me, and there's some consequences afterwards.
Well, perhaps, but we'd have to first we'd have to first identify the validity of the appearance of that God before we can even talk about the validity of what he's saying. Because even if God did penetrate the world in human form, does that necessarily mean that everything that he says is moral?
Oh no, I'm not. I'm not talking about the specific definition of communication, like through prophets or through Jesus Christ or whatever. I mean, by any means of communication through, I
Yeah,
don't
well,
know.
by any means, it still wouldn't prove that the truth of the morality. I mean, there's no way to know that this God that's communicating is not a malicious God. For instance, that it doesn't follow from the idea that there's a first cause that it communicates with humans, and it doesn't follow from it communicating with humans that what it's communicating is accurate.
So non-materialistic, you mean? Malicious?
I mean, it could be purposefully deceptive.
Deceptive. Oh, okay. So cognitive deception, you mean?
Yeah, it could be evil. It could be purposefully trying to give us inaccuracies about the universe to perhaps further our devotion to the cause itself, rather than turning our attention to the beauty of the universe. It could be giving us moral wrongs because it enjoys watching us fight each other. It gets a sadistic pleasure from watching humanity go to war, and so it purposefully tells one person one thing and another person another. Maybe that accounts for the contradiction in religious experience, because the same God has told this person one story and this person another, just so that he can watch them fight to the death, like some kind of sick gladiator organizer. And if that's the case, then I don't want anything to do with this God.
Then if we assume that there is a God, and this God, by God I mean just someone who created this universe, and whatever that we know about the universe is as much as we know about this God. Do you think that not communicating with mankind is in itself ontological incoherency?
No, I don't think so. I don't buy into to pretty much any ontological argument in favor of God. I mean, I obviously don't, because if I did, then I'd have to necessarily believe in God's existence. There is absolutely no ontological necessity within the existence of a God for it to be a God that's able to communicate, even able to communicate, let alone willing to.
So do you think it's a contingent being?
You mean the God?
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be, no.
So what? Impossible being.
What do you mean?
I mean, so everything that you might think of, it's either can never happen, can never be, or contingent being, or a must be, right?
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
So where does God fall here?
Oh, I see what you're saying. I mean, so this is the ontological argument. Okay. So the idea being that it's the argument from contingency effectively.
Yeah.
It's that God is a non-contingent being.
Yeah.
Well, there is necessary existence in the sense that, like, we say that all contingent things require some kind of some kind of cause, yes. But the nature of contingency is a tricky one, because, for instance, if you deny the doctrine of free will, there isn't really so much contingency, because there were no two ways to go about it. The idea of contingency rests on the fact that, for instance, my parents could never have met, and it was contingent on them meeting that I was born. But it's very possible that the universe is predetermined, and it's not so much contingent because it was a necessary connection. But there's no religious significance to that. You could say that if you do agree with this contingency argument, that God is either necessary or impossible or contingent, then you haven't solved the problem, because you just have to choose one of those three. You probably can't choose the middle one. Some people would claim that they can, but some people would just say that the God is necessary. Some people would say that God is impossible because, for instance, the concept of omnipotence is internally incoherent. But again, you're not really getting much further either way. Like, it doesn't really do anything for me. If you can prove that God is either necessary or is impossible, then perhaps I would have some step forward in at least saying, well, now the question should be, which is it? But even if you succeeded in that, like, I don't think you could answer that second question.
So another social media epistemology here is the question that we normally get is looks like you have all of the evidences that God exists. However, you still refute and debunk everything. So what kind of evidence are you waiting for?
Well, I don't know, but God does. I mean, I don't need to know what it would take to convince me. I don't know what it is, and I'm not the one who's making the claim. Somebody else is saying, here's some evidence that should convince you. And I say, well, it doesn't. And they say, well, what would convince you? And I say, look, you're the one who came here in the first place. I never claimed to be looking for some kind of for some kind of convincing, or at least let's say I wasn't claiming. I'm not expecting to find it. I mean, I'm looking for it in the sense that I'd be glad if you presented it to me, but I'm not expecting it. I'm not sitting around and thinking like it's gonna come eventually. So what's going to convince me? I don't know. Maybe nothing ever will. But if there is a God who wants me to know him, then that God knows exactly what it would take. And so he either doesn't care or he's purposefully restricting it from me. So he's either malicious or uncaring. And in the same sense as I was speaking before, that doesn't cut it for me. I don't. If he doesn't care, then I don't care either.
You're not purposely denying all of the evidences just to go along with your sins.
No. I mean, that's the idea that people want to sin. Firstly, the concept of sin doesn't exist within my framework. So it's always a poor argument to put to an atheist. You just want to stay in your sins. I mean, sin is a non-concept to them. But secondly, that's not true because, like I say, if I was convinced tomorrow that there was a first mover, that wouldn't make me any more or less likely to murder somebody. It's not about wanting to do these things. And also, Penn Jillette had a good point on this. He was responding to this idea that if you don't have God, then you can do whatever sins you want, and that's why people are atheists, because they want to sin and they want to do as much sin as they can. They want to just go and rape and pillage and murder. And Penn Jillette said, well, actually, you know what, you're right, because I don't believe God exists, and I have raped and murdered every single person I wanted to, and that number is 0. That's how many people I've wanted to do that to, because I don't need a God to tell me that that's wrong. So it's got nothing to do with me wanting to do these things, because quite clearly I don't. And so you can't have it both ways. You can't say, well, look, you've got a moral character, and so that must come from somewhere, so God must exist. But at the same time say, oh, well, you have no moral character, and that's why you don't think God exists. It's incoherent. Like you're clutching at straws at that point. It's like, I've beat you on the one argument, and now you're going to the other. The argument, you just want to stay in your sins, just stinks of desperation to me.
Is it? Have you seen the daily atheist checklist?
No.
so you can, Adam, you can remind us of it if you remember it.
It's like at 7:30 in the morning you wake up and you, I don't know, gargle with a child blood or something, and then
you eat a young kid, and then
yep.
Here's the thing though: who is it that's actually abusing children? Who is it that's actually doing grotesque, unthinkable things? Who is it that's cutting off the genitalia of children? Who is it that is condemning people to hell? Who is it that are restricting homosexuality? Who is it that are killing atheists for merely dissenting from a philosophical position? Who's actually the one doing that? I mean, can you name me a secular humanist group that advocates those things? Can you name me a country that has secularized and begun doing those things? Because I can name you plenty who've adopted the teachings of the Quran or of the Bible or of the Torah or of any other kind of nonsensical scripture and started doing those things precisely because of it. So if you want to talk about horrendous crimes and who are the ones committing them, don't be pointing the finger at me. You've got to wash the hand of the blood that's on it before you point your finger at me.
No, I have an answer for that. Hold on. I have an answer for that. I have a common answer for that. Now, remember Hitler. Remember Mao Zedong. Remember
the name rings a bell, yes.
So the biggest wars actually in the history of mankind were not conducted by theists.
So what?
So you answering your question is who's killing people? Yeah, atheists are killing people.
Okay, so firstly, Hitler was a Roman Catholic, at least pronounced as Roman Catholic, actually doing his dirty work certainly were. Hitchens spoke endlessly on this about the religious basis of the Nazi Party, the fact that the belt buckles of the Nazi soldiers were inscribed with "Gott mit uns," God on our side. The fact that Hitler refers to doing God's work in Mein Kampf, and also not to mention the fact that the anti-Semitism that is inherent in the Nazi doctrine is probably in complete cahoots with the anti-Semitism that was espoused by the Catholic Church as an official doctrine until the 60s, the 1960s, an official doctrine of anti-Semitism. Perhaps that had something to do with the anti-Semitism of the Nazi Party. But aside from that, you also have people like Stalin, who indeed were quite atheistic. Okay, right. But he wasn't a humanist. He wasn't a secular humanist. He didn't have a moral compass. And in fact, Stalin, if anything, deified himself to a level resembling a religion itself. What is the first rule of monotheism? Thou shalt have no other gods before me. That is the rule that was being enacted upon by the USSR under Stalin, who said, whatever gods that you're believing in, you've got to get rid of them because you've got to bow down and kiss my feet. I mean, that's one of the most religious ideas I've ever heard.
Yeah, but he believed in exactly your belief or disbelief system that this world is all there is. We have you both share a materialistic view of the world. We are just mere animals, so there is no issue to no big deal to kill a lot of people for me to live.
Two things. First, that's not what I believe. I'm not I don't claim to know that God does not exist in the same way that he does, and I certainly don't advocate the thing that I would believe more strongly than anything as a political principle is the idea of freedom of thought. Like, I may absolutely despise the doctrine of Christianity and original sin, or the doctrines of Islam, and the things that it prescribes, but I would never dream of restricting you from believing them. I mean, that's like a first step. That's the step that Stalin took. That's where the problem lies. The problem doesn't lie with the belief that there's no God. The problem lies with taking the step of forcing other people to act in coherence with that. That's not something that I would ever advocate. But I mean, as well as that, like I don't see how someone can say that from what I've said, a kind of agnostic disbelief, a philosophical reason not to believe in God. That's another thing, actually. I'll put that on the shelf because this is more interesting. Why do I campaign philosophically against religion? Why did Stalin campaign politically against religion? I do it because I think that it doesn't have a philosophical grounding. Do you really think that that is why Stalin was purging Russia of the Orthodox Church and murdering priests? Do you think it was because he said, you know what, I've philosophically reflected on this, I think it might not be that true, and so let's go and kill a bunch of priests? Of course not. He said that this is a threat to the authority of the state, and that's why he did it. I don't think that the ideas are a threat to the authority of the state. That's not why I'm doing it. I'm doing it because I think that it's wrong. I think that it's immoral, but I'd never kill someone for it. I'd never so much as hold them intellectually responsible in the sense that they have to change their mind or else. So not only does Stalin not believe what I believe, but also he believed what he did believe for different reasons to the reasons that I believe what I believe. And the more important part of my philosophy, the active part of my philosophy, is the secular humanism that is notably absent from the Stalinist party. So the claim that anything that I'm espousing is in any way an advocacy or even not a refutation of the authoritarianism and the tyranny within the communism of Stalin and his successors and his predecessor is a foolish objection.
But what if somebody says that he was more consistent to his atheistic, or more loyal, to be accurate, to his atheistic worldview? He was more consistent than you are, and he's an atheist. Yeah, go ahead.
That's not what it was. It's not a commitment to atheism. It's a commitment. I don't want to say anti-theism, because that has come to mean just an active belief that God does not exist, or a desire that it's not true. But he, what could be called anti-theism? What's a better term? Let me see. He believed in a. Okay, I'm going to use the term, but bear in mind this isn't how people usually use the term. He believed in an anti-theism, as in theism needs to be destroyed through political and military means.
Yeah.
That was his breed. That's what he believed in. Now, it doesn't matter how strongly you believe in that, because if you're like, this isn't a difference in quality or quantity, I should say. This is a different in kind. It's not like I believe this and Stalin has just dialed it up. It's like I believe this and he believes this. And it doesn't matter how strongly, they are separate issues. I believe in, well, I disbelieve in claims of the existence of God. That is a far cry from believing that religion needs to be tackled politically and militarily. Now, even if that's something that someone did believe but didn't enact upon, that would be enough to make me despise what they think, even if they never had the political power to actually do anything about it. If somebody said to me, you know, if I had the power, I think I'd restrict people from being religious. I sit them down and I tell them why that is the worst idea that they've probably ever had and don't even realize. It doesn't matter how strongly you enact upon that. Stalin reached the peak performance, if you like, of doing that. And that is a completely separate issue to how strongly you believe in the existence of a God. Like that is an independent issue. So it's not that he's believing more strongly in what I believe in and that's why he's done what he's done. It's that he believes in something entirely different and just happens to believe in it incredibly strongly and happens to have the political authority and the political de facto power to enforce it. And if I had that power, if you put me as the head of a state, do you think that what the first thing I would do would be murdering priests of the Russian Orthodox Church? If you do, then you must have misinterpreted many of the things that I've been saying. But I hope to pay you the compliment of assuming that you haven't and that you can see quite clearly from what I'm saying, even if I wasn't speaking clearly, even if I was being an obscurist or something, you can quite clearly see that that is not what I'm advocating. And anybody who says that I am is either being purposefully disingenuous or is just completely misunderstanding the point of everything that I'm doing.
And the problem here is, Alex, is cognitively hard for most people, cognitively hard to realize that there is a spectrum of things. That if I'm asking you, or I'm asking a woman not to be completely veiled, for example, then automatically they would think that what I mean is bikini. So
Exactly.
distinguishing that when I was saying I don't want you to be here, that doesn't really mean that I have you to be here.
Yes, but even in that, even granted that, and you're right, the human mind has a tendency to think in extremities. I don't want people to think of it in terms of mild atheism on one side of the spectrum and anti-religious murder on the other side. These are not on the same spectrum. If you take the philosophy that I espouse and push it to its limits, all you would have is a philosophical belief that God does not exist. That's as far as it takes you. It's got nothing to do with freedom of thought and restricting people from believing these things. That is a completely separate issue. The extremity, the most extreme you could get, if you could take my philosophy and produce an extremist, someone who would be called a fundamentalist in those beliefs, they would not be a violent person. They would not be someone who tries to restrict other people's freedom of thought. The only place that comes from is either religion or a pseudo-religion like communism. Or I should say, Stalinist communism.
The reason what I'm saying this is no matter how hard we try to convince people that atheism is just as simple as not believing in God or not believing that there is a reason good enough to believe in God, they wouldn't really stop at that point. So they have to take it way further and beyond this. Saying, okay, so you're saying that we are mere animals, bacteria, then you don't really have any issues in like killing everyone in the world. You don't have any issues in like abusing children and so on.
Well, maybe you don't, and maybe that's because you've read a religious scripture that condones rape and murder and slavery. Or maybe it's just because you don't have the sound moral character that evolution has bestowed upon all of us. Whether or not that's an accurate moral compass is besides the point. It is not a failure of any kind of atheistic doctrine if people believe that it leads to moral abominations. It's a failure of the person who's doing the interpreting.
It's eventually we have reached out to a situation where when somebody comes up and say that you're an atheist, then you don't have any moral values. Either there is nothing stopping you from killing people, from murdering people, raping people, and everything. Then the only strike back that I have I don't really have to justify myself and justify where morals come from and everything. All what I have to say about this is, if you think that your religion is the only thing prohibiting you from doing and committing murders and raping and everything, then please do not leave your religion. Stay as you are. Forget me and stay as you are. Be Muslim, be Christian, as long as this is the only thing that is preventing you from raping me or killing me.
Yes, but also don't call yourself a moral person.
Oh yeah. Adam, do you have anything to say before moving on to the next phase?
There is something that has been on my mind, but I'm not sure if now is the right time. We keep, while Alice is answering the questions, I think we do lack some definitions of certain terms. So I'm not sure if there was something I wanted to read out and see a bit by bit what Alex will, if Alex will agree or disagree with the statement. But if you're following a certain flow at the moment, I don't want to disrupt that. You can continue going, and I can.
Sorry, hold on. I can't hear you. I've lost audio. I don't quite know what I've done.
Can you hear me?
I can't hear either of you. I think I must have hit a mute button or something somewhere. What have I done here?
Okay, we'll probably need
to
talk somehow.
I just can't hear either of you. I assume you can both still hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Is there like is there a button to mute the? This is strange. I might just exit and then rejoin the conversation. I'll be back in a second.
Okay.
شكرا يا آدم طبعا.
اتفضل.
نريح الناس شويه من الانجليزي، الناس كلها تعبانه من الانجليزي، او مش عارف ايه ده، الناس فجاه كلها بقت بتكتب انجليزي، بتتكلم انجليزي، ما شاء الله، ايه ده؟ انا
احنا عايشين في مجتمع مثقف، انت فاكر ايه؟
طيب انا مش عارف بقى، لو حد عندك اسئله هتاخدها من التكست، او لو حد عنده اسئله يا جماعه نسالها للضيف لغايه ما يدخل ده تاني. Again, just in case, Alex just joined. Okay, so
I can hear you now.
You can hear us now. Okay, just for the previous minute, and in case you were going to take this video, we're just saying that we're amazed by the amount of people who are asking questions in English, and that this is good. So I thought yeah, fantastic. So we're trying to kind of extract any question, any good question that we might spot.
I should let you know I can probably only talk for a maximum of another half an hour, if that's okay.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Like Adam, you can proceed, Adam, if you have these terminologies you're talking about.
Okay. So there was this article that went viral among the religious circles at some point, which is called, funny enough, Axioms of Faith. And in this article, it goes through some definitions in the format of at least and even if. So I'm going to read a few definitions to you, and if you object or if you have any reservation on any of these definitions, please do. So it defines faith, to start with, faith is at least a way to contextualize the human need for spirituality and find meaning in the face of morality. And even if this is all faith is, spiritual practice can be beneficial to cognition, emotional states, and culture. Do you agree?
That seems a very specific definition of faith that I mean, look, you can define it how you like. If that's how you want to define it, I don't have a problem, but that's not how I think people generally use it. Faith just tends to mean any kind of belief that someone holds without evidence, but rather on the basis of some kind of inexplicable or non-rational belief that they know or admit isn't based on rational thinking as such, as it is just this idea of faith. But I mean, it's not a problem to me if someone wants to define it like that. It just means that they're using it differently to how I think most people would.
It definitely is not the common definition of faith, but there is a catch here. Because if you follow each definition, it will build up from the previous one, and eventually I will convince you of God and Jesus and so. Well, but that's how the article goes. So even though this is not the common definition of faith, do you have any disagreement with this statement I just said, or do you want me to
Yes.
reread it? You
Yes,
do.
because
Okay.
you don't need
Please go
faith
ahead.
you don't need faith to try to make sense of moral doctrine. That's not. I mean, if faith is not like an attempt to make sense of these things, um, that can be done evidentially. If you speak to moral naturalists, they say that the way that you make sense of morality is through empiricism. That's not faith, and they wouldn't call that faith. So, I mean, you seem to just be kind of annexing a definition of general moral thinking and calling it faith, and that's an obvious step. It's like, okay, so you've taken what most people do intuitively, which is try to make sense of morality, and called it faith, so that you can then go on and say, well, look, you're doing this, so you must be a faithful person. You must be a person of faith. I mean, that seems to be what they're probably trying to do. And look, they can do that if they like. If they're defining faith as the attempt to make sense of morality, then yeah, sure, I'm a faithful person, but only according to that very strict and unused definition of faith.
Fair enough. Okay, moving on. God. God is at least the natural forces that created and sustained the universe, as experienced via a psychological model in human brains that naturally emerges from innate biases. And even if that is a comprehensive definition of God, the pursuit of this personal, subjective experience can provide meaning, peace, and empathy to others.
Okay, did you say natural at the beginning of that?
Yes, the natural forces.
Okay, so if it's natural, then it's not supernatural, and it's not God. The only way that you could make that definition work is if you take Spinoza's definition of God, which is just an equation to the laws of nature. But if you do that, then me calling the laws of nature or the natural forces behind the universe God is just like me calling the laws of nature Mother Nature. It doesn't mean that I actually believe it's a mother. It's just a useful metaphor to talk about the laws that exist behind the universe. Again, look, definitions. I generally find them uninteresting for the mere fact that if you want to define God that way, then you can. But is that what people actually mean? I mean, like these kind of arguments,
No.
they're just a way of trying to manipulate definitions into claiming that people believe things that they don't. Because I mean, if I said to you, I'm going to define God as toast, and like, do you believe in toast? Well, yeah, then you believe in God. I mean, the only thing you can do in that situation is say, yes, okay, I believe in God, but only under the condition that God means toast. And when I go to another person and say, hey, listen, this guy said that he believes in God, then I've got all my work ahead of me to say, hey, when we had that conversation, you said that God means toast, which I don't think this guy does. So don't go around telling them that. So I mean, these definitional games. Look, if you want to define God as the laws behind the making of the universe, of course I believe that there are laws behind the making of the universe. I just don't call them God. But if you want to call them God, then fine. I believe in your God, but I don't believe in capital God.
Yeah, fair enough. And I guess that was the part that I wanted actually to get out of you, which is manipulation of definition. God is toast. I love that.
Should get that on a T-shirt, maybe. I think definitions are the most important thing in philosophy. G.E. Moore writes quite well on this. He distinguishes different types of definitions. I mean, there's a type of definition that is just there's one type of definition which is I think he calls it something like the it's got the word arbitrary in it. It's like an arbitrary definition, which is to say, when I say, X, you are to understand that I mean this. That's one type of definition. Another type of definition is when other people say X, when people generally say X, I think that they mean this. That's slightly different from saying this is what I mean by it to say this is what I think people generally mean by it. That's the kind of definition that dictionaries work with, for instance. The other kind of definition is the definition that we should be interested in, which is the nature of the thing that's being defined. As in, if I ask you what a horse is, you can tell me that, well, I think when most people refer to a horse, they mean this particular breed of whatever. That's not the philosophically interesting question. The question would be, the word horse are referring to, what is that? What is the nature of that thing? So the questions that you're asking, the definitional questions you're asking, when you say what is God, what this article is trying to do is trying to take the uninteresting definitional questions and say, well, God is defined as this. But I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in the thing that is the object of your definition. What is its nature? That's what I'm interested in. So if your definition of God is the laws of nature, then the question for me is, what is the nature of the laws of nature? If you believe God to be a supernatural deity, then I want to know what's the nature of that supernatural deity. I don't care about that first step. I don't care about what the definition is in that sense. I care about what the word means in the sense of what it means, what the object of the definition means, not what the word literally means. You know.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the reason I wanted to bring up this this article or this topic is, it is quite common these days when you go and debate or have a conversation with apologetics, they usually try to twist meanings and manipulate definitions in order to get you to a common ground to agree. And in most cases, I would probably say the same thing you said. If you are going to define God as this, then yeah, maybe we could argue that on a completely different topic or completely different approach to it. But this is not the God that we usually debate with or against, if that makes sense. So I wanted to be a little bit cunning, so to speak, and see how you come to that.
Yeah, you just don't want to confuse your definitions. That's why people spend so long on it. Obviously, the person to read here is Wittgenstein. If we could have the longest conversation you like, I mean, you could, if someone jumped into this conversation after we defined God as toast, and I was saying, well, you know what, I think God exists because I've seen God. I've seen God with my own senses. I saw God with my own eyes. And you say, well, you know, I heard about a guy who saw God. I've never seen God myself. And I'm like, well, you know, God's been in my house. You know, I've seen God. I've consumed God. You know, I've eaten the bread of Christ. You know, I've really consumed it. Somebody listening to that conversation might jump in and say, hold on, wait, are you saying that you've seen God? And I'll say, yes, I have. And they're like, oh, see, I've seen God as well. And they're like, look, this guy agrees with me. But he doesn't agree with him because they're not talking about the same thing. So you've got to be incredibly careful when you're talking about philosophy to make sure that you understand exactly and precisely the same thing about the same word. Otherwise, you are just playing common examples that are given. I think by Wittgenstein himself is the idea of playing chess but using the rules of rugby. It just won't get you anywhere. You need to make sure that you're playing by the same rule book in conversation. You can have a success. You can have a conversation when you both understand something different by the meaning of God. It just won't be a successful one, and it certainly won't be a philosophically compelling or interesting one.
I think it's called a fallacy of equivocation, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
so when you use the term, when you use the term twice, but each time it means a different thing.
Yeah, but it's not. I mean, it's not the fallacy in the sense that it's not always the case that somebody. I mean, that's what I think this article is doing. It's committing the equivocation fallacy. But in general conversation, it's not a fallacy. It's just the case that people have a different understanding. No one's changing their definition. No one's like being sneaky in that sense. But they just haven't worked out what each other mean yet, and so the conversation is fruitless. I think that's what's going on in a lot of philosophical conversation, especially conversation about a concept as abstract as God. It's a definitional problem, and it's not necessarily because someone is committing that fallacy. Oftentimes, it's just an innocent disregard for the importance of definitions.
Yes, correct. I think it's in many cases, and what I have seen normally when somebody comes up and asks me, do you believe in God? Then my first question would be, how do you define God? Mm-hmm. You tell me how you define God, and I will tell you whether I believe in Him and that in light of that definition or not. So
people have painted the idea so broadly, this idea of God, that you have to ask that now. You have to really say, you have to be very careful to say, well, what exactly do you mean by God? I mean, beforehand, you could have been pretty certain that the person probably, in my country, for instance, 100 years ago, you could be pretty certain that the person probably meant the Christian God. You could be pretty certain that they probably like understand the same thing as God as you do without needing to ask that question. But because of the variance of ideas and because of the misrepresentation of these ideas that people have put forward, you have to make sure that they know what you actually mean by God, by atheism. It's similar to how, you know, how recently the word racism is thrown around like it's nobody's business. Everybody is accused of being a racist if for instance, Sam Harris might, or Charles Murray is a better example, might be called a racist because of his work on IQ, which, whether scientifically accurate or not, is difficult to describe as racist. But because of all this kind of misrepresentation and confusion, if somebody comes up to you and says, "Are you a racist?" you have to kind of say, "Well, what do you mean by racist?" You know, and that sounds absurd. Like, of course I'm not a racist, but you have to ask because they might mean something completely unthinkable. And in the exact same sense, when somebody asks, "Do you believe in God?" then your first instinct is to just go, well, no. But then you're just like, wait, hold on. Just remember the kind of misrepresentations that are going on around here. And so it's probably better to ask, well, what do you actually mean by that?
Right. So I have a question from the text, from the live chat. Question from Emmy. She's asking if someone believes in God or whatever religion, does that entail that he has a low IQ or he's just ignorant?
And I don't think it entails either. I have a talk I gave in Los Angeles, which is available on my channel, called "Why Smart People Believe Silly Things."
I've heard it.
And the precise, well, thank you for watching. The precise point of that is to say, not only is it possible for someone who's incredibly intelligent to believe a silly thing, and I'm not trying to speak from a level of authority here. This is just my kind of conception. I don't consider myself to be any kind of have any kind of intellectual superiority to any other person. But the people who I see as having intellectual superiority, the people who I believe are genuinely smart, some of them believe very silly things. And my reasoning for that is that not only is it possible for smart people to believe silly things, but it's more likely that they will, because if they have an initial bias or an initial tendency to believe something, because they're so smart, they're able to talk themselves into it. They're able to argue their case well to themselves. And so it actually becomes harder to talk them out of it. If somebody who has a low IQ as it's being presented here, if somebody who is, I mean, for lack of a more polite way to put it, if somebody is just not very well philosophically endowed and they have a bad idea, it should be fairly easy to talk them out of it, because they can just be convinced. Like, it's no problem. You don't even have to put up a complicated argument, because they might be convinced by it. But someone who is just hot on the philosophy, someone who knows an answer to everything, who's read deeply, they'll be able to object to your objections, and they might be able to believe this idea even more strongly than somebody who's less smart than they are. So I don't think that religion is indicative of a low IQ at all. But I mean, I think it's perhaps indicative of certain biases. It's indicative, depending on the reasons people give for believing in God. I mean, if I meet someone on the street who says, "I believe in God," and I say, "Why?" and they say, "Well, I mean, have you looked around?" That's very different from someone who says that they believe in God because they've been a biologist for the past 30 years and they're just everything that they find is pointing them in the direction of God or whatever. Like, those are two very different situations. In the former case, it would be indicative of perhaps a lack of philosophical reflection on it. I mean, have you considered the fact that when you look around, there's a lot of pain and suffering and there's a lot of poor design? Maybe they haven't, but I'll bet that the biologist has thought about that. So you can't just take religious belief as a whole and see and decide whether or not it's indicative of someone being smart or reflective or philosophically endowed or whatever. That to me is a separate issue. For me, what is indicative of the level of intelligence, the level of philosophical reflection, is the reason they believe it, not the actual belief itself.
Yeah, I have read a couple topics on the exact same question or statements of why smart people believe stupid things, and I also have watched your video and a couple more videos, and I have a theory here on this. If I don't know what you have to say about that. And do you recall the Maslow's triangle of needs?
Yes.
So the answer to this question will have to depend on where you place this religion or belief, in which level of this triangle. So if you put it towards the base of the triangle, towards the area where you feel safe, secure, stable, like this basic needs, then definitely you will find smart people believing in stupid things, because they feel that without this, they're not stable. They will fear stuff, and it's okay if you're very intelligent and you can still fear some stuff, and you can still have some instabilities. That's okay with me, and I think it's okay with a lot of people. But if you place it somewhere else, then you can think about this. You can discuss this. You can take or leave. You will think about religion and belief at some point in your life. So do you get the point here?
Yep, and I mean, I couldn't agree more, but only on the assumption that religion is needed or wanted at all. I mean, you're right. Like, if it is something that would exist within the hierarchy of needs, then wherever it lies within that triangle will determine. I think you're right. Like how prone somebody who, even with great rational function, is likely to believe in it. But to me, it doesn't even appear in the triangle at all, because it's not needed and it's not wanted. So that wouldn't be the thing that, for me, determines why somebody would believe it, because to me it doesn't need to exist in the triangle at all.
Yes, that's a personal decision. You decided that this makes you stable, this makes you moral, this makes you safer, this makes you feel comfortable and safe. So if you decide so, then probably you would stay as religious as you are. If you decide
again,
that
the very belief that religion does offer that kind of comfort is itself a belief that might be indicative of somebody who hasn't reflected on the fact that you can get meaning for life elsewhere.
Yeah, and this also a good question that I would like also to ask in the remaining of the time of our time. Adam, do you have anything to add here?
Not to add, but I had a question, but after yours.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask Alex, it's a little bit of a on the personal side question. As an activist, as someone who has a channel and gives talks or lectures and educate people in this, what's in it for you? Why do you do that? Why are you trying to? I'll put it in a religious, the way the religious people say it. Why are you trying to take faith away from people?
I asked this to him. My first question.
Well, I mean,
sorry.
I mean, it was asked slightly differently. I mean, I get letters sometimes in the PO box. I get emails even more frequently from people who tell me all sorts of things, and they vary from just incredibly touching messages of thanks for just. I mean, I'm not going to claim that I single-handedly help these people to understand a concept, but perhaps I just put the concept on the agenda. Like, they saw the thumbnail of a video and thought, I haven't even considered that kind of line of thinking before. And they're grateful for that. And it ranges from that to people who just say, hey, I love the videos. And to think that, I know how much of an effect certain people on YouTube or certain authors who've written books that aren't very widely circulated have had on me, and how I think, like, that those people, I look upon those people with such what's the word, I mean, I just have so much respect for them. I almost venerate them. I think that these people are amazing, and the chances are they don't even know how much of an impact they had. And I'm thinking, if I can share in just a slice of that, then that's enough for me. It is amazing to think that I might be doing something similar to what those authors did for me. And if that is the case in any way, shape, or form, then I will want to do this until the day I die. So that, I mean, that's reason number one. Reason two is all the money that it gets me from AdSense and Patreon.
Probably that's number one. Right? So we ordered.
Yes, no, that's true. I mean, as touching as the messages of thanks are, if the money stops, then they can go away.
Also, if the money stops, you won't go back to Christianity. You will just be a silent atheist.
Yeah, look, once the money stops, I'm going to convert to Christianity, become a pastor, move to America, and then set up a mega church so I can make even more money. That's the end goal here.
All right. So let me ask you this on the other hand, on another topic. Do you believe in free will?
No.
Do you believe that's a question?
What do you mean?
I mean, if I ask you, do you believe in free will? So this, I'm expecting either yes or no.
Well, yeah, no. The answer is no. I don't.
Yeah, I know, but does it really have to be yes or no?
Oh, well, I mean, it depends on what you mean by free will. We were just talking about the importance of definition, were we not? So, I mean, what do you mean? What's the concept here?
So I tried to see. I caught you.
So, okay,
yeah,
hit me with it. What's the definition?
In what I think is the most appropriate form of the question is everything that we do completely determined before? If by any chance we went back in time for the last 5 minutes, would it always go exactly the same way, or do we have any margin of free will that might make us change anything in this?
Those aren't opposite claims. The universe doesn't have to be deterministic for free will not to exist. The universe could have gone any way it likes. What matters is whether you had any control over that. It's not about whether the universe could have done this or could have done that. It's about, did you have any agency in making a decision that caused that to come about? So that's the important thing there. So the definition of free will can't be something like the lack of determinism. So I mean, succinctly, like, what would you? I don't know if you believe in free will or not, but if you do, or if you're just trying to represent the position of someone who does, what's the definition we're working on?
In my viewpoint, and I might be completely wrong, I think that we still have this tiny margin of control over our behavior, our doings. I believe so. And
Okay.
if you ask me what kind of evidence that would support my my argument, I don't really have any concrete evidence to support this. Just like I feel so. And
Okay, well, I mean, try this out for size. So, what is the why do you do anything? I mean, to me, it's very clear that it's only possible to do something because you desire to, because you want to. And I'm using the word want and desire there very carefully. What I mean to say is, in the same sense as earlier, when I hold a gun to your head and tell me to give tell you to give me your wallet, you want to give me your wallet. You know, you want to avoid the death. So the only reason you do anything that's conscious, I mean, so falling out of bed when you're sleeping doesn't count, because we know that's not free will anyway. The things that you do by choice are because you want to do them. I mean, would you disagree with that statement?
No, I completely agree that there is huge bunch of stuff that you completely don't have any control over, starting your birth, probably up until maybe 60 or 70% of your day. It's completely automatic, and maybe even the circulation of your blood and heart beating and everything. You don't have any control over this. But I'm talking about other classifications of doings, something like thinking, something like do I drink tea or coffee? Do I put
Okay, so
one?
why do you drink the tea or the coffee? What is it that makes that choice? It's which you want more, right?
At that point, yeah.
Yeah. And can you control which you want more?
Can I control or can I choose?
Either. I mean, do you have a choice over what it is that you want?
That's it. I can claim that yes, I do. At a point, yeah.
So do you currently want to slap yourself in the face?
No.
Okay, just choose to want to do it for a second.
I get the point.
It's not even possible. Okay, the only way that you could actually want to slap yourself in the face, maybe you thought there, aha, I'm going to prove this guy wrong. I want to slap myself in the face. But why do you want to slap yourself in the face? It's because you want to win an argument. Well, why do you want to win the argument? You just do. You didn't choose to want to win the argument. You just did. You don't have the choice over the want. So whether you choose the tea or coffee is determined on which one you want more. You don't control your wants, and so you don't control whether you go for the tea or coffee. But here's the thing, you think that you do, and this is what you were alluding to. There's a very strong illusion of free will, because you are making a choice. Because the most common definition that I hear about free will, or at least the most intuitive one, I think, is the definition that says the ability to do whatever you want. Now, I don't dispute that. If that's what you think free will is, then you have it. And that's where the illusion comes in, because you really can do whatever you want. But the catch, as Arthur Schopenhauer writes in his essay of free will, the catch is that you can't control what it is that you can do whatever you want, but it has to be free will to say, you can do whatever you want as long as it's this specific thing. I mean, that's not what free will is. But because you're acting always in accordance with what you want to do, you feel as though the action originated within your consciousness. You feel like the action originated with your agency, because you're like, well, I'm only acting in accordance with what I as an agent want to do. That's where the illusion comes from. And that's why there is a difference between jumping and being pushed. I mean, there is definitely an experiential difference. And that's where the illusion of free will comes from, because clearly there's something different between jumping off of a cliff and being pushed off a cliff. But the only difference is that the inescapable and unchangeable desire to, or the inescapable motive or cause of you falling off the cliff, in the case of jumping, came from within you, and in the case of being pushed, came from without you. You had equal control over both.
But I have two questions here. First one is what if I can claim that I decided not to prove you wrong in your example? I can say so. What if is it okay to build a case based on an example, just one example? Is it okay to disprove that there is, even if it's a very tiny margin of free will, just based on a single example?
No. So here's where I'm making a claim now. So the burden of proof is on me. I'm saying, look, everything that you do is because you want to, and you might say, well, look, you give me an example with like the tea or the coffee or with jumping and being pushed, but like those aren't enough to construct the case. And it's like, okay, but look, you only have to find a single example, just a single example of doing something consciously that isn't because you want to. Just one, just a single example, and my entire philosophy falls apart. The entire thing. You just need one, and no one has been able to do it. Not a single person. Because
what have you proved here? You proved that full free will, 100% free will is not there. And I'm with you. But did you really prove that even like a 1% or even less than that free will is not there?
Yes, because if it is the case that every action you make is based on your desires, if that is true, then it deductively follows. Again, it's a deductive argument. If everything you do is because you want to do it, and if you cannot control your wants, then you cannot control everything you do. That is to say, everything you do is out of your control, not just some of it. It follows from it. So you would have to find an example of doing something that you don't want to do to disprove that. And not only, it's not only a practical thing. It's not only a case of like, can you actually find the example in practice? It's like conceptually, if you spend enough time thinking about it, you realize that it's not, it is metaphysically impossible to do something except in accordance with your desires and wants. It cannot be done. And if that is the case, then every action you make is out of your control.
Why do you go, on that note, Ahmed, why do you sometimes take an action out of not necessarily your desire? For example, for instance, take a mother who would sacrifice herself to save her child. No one desires to die for the sake of another human being,
well,
but you might take this.
I don't mean to interrupt, but like it's important.
Sorry.
I mean, she does. She does want her son to survive. Why does she want her son to survive more than she wants to live?
I honestly can't comprehend it. To me, it's even anti-evolution. Since when you don't care about your own life and care about another one? Yeah.
If that's what you think, I'd recommend reading Peter Singer's book, The Expanding Circle, to explain how, specifically within the family at least, people can act altruistically, like running into a fire to save their children, even if that's going to damage themselves. Peter Singer covers it very well in that book. But besides the point, granting the fact there, because we don't have much time to go into it, that evolution does allow for something like that to happen. I mean, that's besides the point anyway. If this mother wants to save her child more than she wants to live, why is that the case? Like you say, you can't comprehend it, but like neither can she. I mean, she just does. If she didn't want to save the child, then she wouldn't. Like if she wanted to live more than she wanted to save the child, then by definition, that's what she would have done. The only reason that she decided to die in order to save the child is because she wanted to save the child. Why does she want to save the child? She just does. And I would happen to opine that it is a product of evolution. And if that's the case, then it bolsters the case even further, because the reason that she did that was because of an evolutionary process that instilled a kind of genetic altruism within her. She didn't have any control over that. In cases of self-sacrifice, in cases of doing things that you appear not to want to do, it's only ever because there's something stronger that you do want to do that requires this bad thing. It's like, why do you go to the gym if you don't enjoy running? Well, it's because you want to be healthy. I mean, why is the desire to be healthy strong going to the gym? It's just not. If it wasn't stronger, then you just would not go to the gym. And you don't get to control which desire is stronger. It is just one or the other. And nothing that you can do can change that. The only thing that can change that is some kind of line of argument. But even if that happens, you don't get to decide whether you find the line of argument convincing or not. It just convinces you or it doesn't. Every single aspect of this is completely out of your control.
On the same topic, you were just saying that nobody can know anything for sure, for 100%, like epistemologically.
Well, I
that
don't
is
think
not
I said that.
100% something.
I don't remember saying that, because there are certain things that I think you can know with 100% certainty. Like, for instance, the fact that I exist in some form. I know that that's the case.
You said that this is the only thing that we can know for sure.
I mean, yes, I would probably say that that's the case.
Yeah, and that's why you said that. I cannot say that 100% God does not exist, or 100% He does exist, or anything, right? So how come you're sure 100% that there is no free will?
Are you 100% sure that the Earth orbits the sun?
That the alphabet is?
That the Earth orbits the sun?
No.
Okay, well, neither am I, because there has to be some level of skepticism, right?
Yes.
But I am as certain that the Earth orbits the sun as I am that free will does not exist. That's how I'd characterize it. Now, I can't be 100% certain about either, but I'm certainly not as certain about God's non-existence as I am that the Earth orbits the sun. I would never claim that I know with the same level of certainty that God does not exist, that the Earth orbits the sun. I mean, that would be ridiculous. But I will claim that with the free will thing, it's a belief that is as strong as any other truth claim. All truth claims require some kind of level of skepticism. But that level of skepticism isn't inherent to the rejection of free will. It's just inherent to the nature of things. You know, there's always got to be a level of skepticism. I can't say it's 100% true, but it's as convincing as any argument of science or any argument of reason could ever be.
And that's fair enough. But do you think if we really don't have free will, would be able to recognize this?
Well, not in the sense that, I mean, we can recognize it as rational creatures. That's what I think that a lot of philosophers have managed to do. But we'll never be able to get rid of the illusion. I mean, the illusion is almost necessitated. I mean, like it's evolutionarily instilled into us that we have this free agency. We need to experience the illusion. There's no way to escape that. But it is just that, an illusion.
Yeah, but again, I mean, like, does a cat really know it's a cat? Does a computer program it really recognizes that it is a computer program?
Well, whether it does or it doesn't, that doesn't change the fact that it is. And whether we do or do not recognize the fact that we cannot have free will, it doesn't change the fact that we don't.
What if this is just a decision that we have made?
What do you mean?
I decided that there is no free will.
Oh, well, I mean, whether or not, it doesn't matter if you decide that there is or there isn't. That doesn't change whether there is or there is not.
Correct.
That's,
yeah.
I mean, that's besides the point. I'm claiming to think, like, I'm claiming a philosophical conviction that free will does not exist. I mean, I could be wrong. Of course, I could be wrong. But I mean, that is just the belief that I will defend. I will always say that I could be wrong. And like you say, like, yeah, it could just be an unfounded belief. But to me, it's convincing, and I hope that if other people spend enough time thinking about it, they'll find it convincing too. But if they don't, I can't blame them for it. It is not their fault after all. They have no control over the matter.
Yeah, so it's exactly the same as when we think that whether there is an evidence or an argument for God or not, that has nothing to do whether God really exists or not. So it's not a matter of believing God exists. It's a matter of believing that there is an evidence good enough to prove the case for God.
Yeah, well, it's like God exists or he doesn't. Like I'll accept that, and that is not contingent on whether we believe that he does or he doesn't. But we can still try to ensure that our beliefs are as accurate as possible. My believing free will does not exist is not the reason that free will does not exist.
Correct.
It's free will not existing that makes me think free will does not exist. So in the same sense, like God existing could make me think that God exists. But you'd need to find some kind of rational argument that position because of the belief whether it exists or does not exist. So like you're right that the belief itself doesn't have an effect over whether or not God does or does not exist. But we can see if our arguments are closer or further to the truth than other arguments through a process of rational thought.
Yes, I agree with you. Even if we disagree on the actual matter or the topic, but I agree with you that this margin of skepticism is always healthy, and I also I'm always saying that certainty is the mother of all evil. If you know what I mean, if I'm sure of something and I'm sure that I'm right, and I have nothing to doubt that I'm right, and I'm sure that you're wrong, then this will definitely lead to something bad in the future.
That's probably the case. Yes, I would agree. I mean, that's essentially my job to make people realize that that isn't the way to live.
Correct, yes. Adam, do you have anything to say before I ask my last question?
There is someone said here, please ask Alex, and I don't necessarily understand the question, but I will read it as it is. If you are given the same type of what you want, like 100 the same type of vanilla ice cream, what informs our choice?
Well,
So I'm not sure if you...
either in that case, and that it's an interesting question, but it's a case of if you've got to choose between two things that are identical, it's either chance, you're either just going to flip a coin or something, or something will come over you to choose the right or the left, and there'll be no rational reason that you can give for doing it. If you can give a rational reason for whichever you gave, then we're back to square one with the idea that you whatever rational reason you had, you were convinced of out of your control. If you can't rationally defend it, then it could just as easily have been the other one. It's not something that you had any control over choosing to do. The only thing left there really is randomness. You see, like if it were truly a random choice, then by definition you had no control because you can't control something that's random. But if it's not random, then there must be some kind of thought process or rational justification behind it. In which case, you don't get to control why you reasoned in the way that you did. But generally speaking, if it were really a case between two identical things, you would have no conviction either way, and therefore it would be a random choice. And if it's random, then it's not in your control.
Thank you.
Right. So let me ask you this, because I know you need to leave now. I'm sorry for holding you up for more than 2 hours. It's been very pleasure having you here, Alex. My last question is: in recently, where I come from, people are getting a kind of a perception that if an atheist is always smarter than a theist or a believer. And if you're an atheist, then automatically you're a better person, especially within this community. So do you believe so?
No, I mean that it's foolish. Nothing. I mean, it's fair to say that sometimes when people believe things, they can be better or worse people. But oftentimes, I mean, it is fair to say that certain beliefs make people bad people. But there's a difference between somebody being a bad person and because of that believing evil things, or someone believing evil things and because of that being an evil person. If somebody is an evil person, then they'll believe evil things, and you can say because of the things that they believe here, like we can identify their evil character and judge them for it. But if somebody just believes an evil thing, that doesn't make them an evil person necessarily. And in the vast majority of cases, I mean, look, I used to be religious. I don't think I was an evil child. I think anybody who claims that because they have a philosophical disagreement with somebody, they're somehow better than them in the sense of worth or intellectual, philosophical worth or something of that sort, needs to pull their head out of their hind. I mean, they could just as easily have believed that too. If it's so, I mean, if you're in an argument with somebody who you think believes something just so ridiculous that they're just below you, then either they should be so easy to convince that they don't believe what they believe at the end of your time with them, or the alternative to that is that what they believe does actually require some engagement, and in which case you are unjustifiably pushing them below you. I think it's foolish.
Got that. But since he's believing in something that makes him a bad person, maybe he didn't believe enough. Maybe he needs to believe more in what he thinks he believes. Maybe he's just a time bomb.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is the danger that the more you believe in certain superstitious nonsense, the more that you are, the more that you are opening yourself up to become a bad person, and that's one of the problems. But when I say that, I don't mean to say in some kind of condescending way or anything, to say that, you know, you're a bad person because you believe this. I'm saying my belief is that if you continue along this path of thought, you're going to end up believing some pretty horrid, gruesome things. And I don't want that for you. You might think the same thing of me, in which case I'm grateful that you're willing to make the effort. So let's sit down and have a conversation and figure out who's right here. Let's not have some kind of intellectual spar to see who comes out on top. We both obviously care about each other's well-being. That's why we're doing this in the first place, because you sincerely want me to go to heaven, and I appreciate that. And I sincerely want you not to waste your life, and you should appreciate that too. And either of us could be right. So let's sit down and figure it out.
Yeah.
Wonderful position.
Yeah, cannot agree more. Normally, I end up agreeing with everything that my guest is saying, especially the last couple of sentences. So again, Alex, it's been a pleasure having you. Thank you so much for accepting the invitation. Thank you, Adam, for accepting the invitation, waking you up early in Australia. And if you guys have anything to say towards the end of this. Adam, خلينا نبدأ بيك.
Well, thank you for having me and for the invitation. And Alex, it's a pleasure meeting you and having this conversation.
No, likewise. I've enjoyed this conversation very much. I've a lot of interviews that I'll do, like live streams and things. It can be quite tedious, sort of getting through topics that are quite general, quite broad. You can't really get down to the nitty-gritty. But we've covered a lot of ground here, and I've quite enjoyed the discussions and the questions, all well formulated. So yeah, thanks for having me. It's been good fun.
Thanks a lot, Alex. This is very compelling to me. Thank you so much, and thanks, Adam, again. Thanks for everyone who've been watching us, and thanks for everyone who is going to watch this in the future as well. Alex, this video is there is no copyright, so if you'd like to use this video or any parts of it, please feel free to do this.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks again. شكرا للجميع. تحياتي للجميع مرة تانية، وإلى اللقاء في لقاء آخر. سلام.